What's going on, everybody? Welcome back once again to The Haunted Beard. My name is Jake, and I decided I wanted to bring a new series of videos to you just called Best of the Year List, where I talk about my favorite and what I think are the best horror and thriller movies of any given year. So today we're going to start off with 2021. Now, typically when people are doing their top movies of the year list, it's usually top 10 movies, and I'm not going to really follow that. I just want to talk about as many movies that I think are worth talking about in any given year. Some years are going to have more than 10, some might have less. It just kind of depends on the year. So, with that being said, let's get into it. These are what I think are the best horror and thriller movies of 2021. Let's do it. So for 2021, I have 13 movies that I want to talk to you about, although there's technically 15. And the reason for that is because coming in at number 13 is the Fear Street Trilogy. And this is the Netflix original horror slasher films that came out during the summer of 2021. And I had a pretty good time with these. Each one has its own kind of unique flavor and visual style to it that I enjoyed. If I was to rank these individually, it would go 1978, 1666, and then 1994. But they each kind of have their own individual identity and flavor to them. 78 is definitely influenced by Friday the 13th. 1994 has sort of that 90s Scream-like slasher influence, and then 1666 is a little bit different. It has kind of that Salem witch trial, witchcraft, supernatural, demonic-ish type thing to it as well. And so each one kind of tells its own story and provides a little bit more background to the mystery that we're trying to figure out. And ultimately, they each contribute to the larger, broader story as a whole. So had a fun time with this. There's some good characters, some good monsters, and so the Fear Street Trilogy kicks off my list at number 13. Next up at number 12 is The Vigil, and this is the story of a man who is a former Orthodox Jew who is tasked with watching a dead body overnight. And I had a good time with this one. It predominantly takes place in one setting inside this house. And he is there watching this body overnight when a malevolent entity makes its presence known. And this is just a good, creepy, tension-filled, suspense-filled movie that works really well. Just a lot of good atmosphere, a lot of just good stuff with kind of lighting effects and just kind of a bit of a slow burn in some aspects and good at tension and suspense building. And it predominantly takes place in just that one setting. And so I think they make effective use of having kind of those limitations of just having a one setting as well. And so had a good time with The Vigil. I would recommend it. It sits at number 12. Next up at number 11 is My Heart Can't Beat Unless You Tell It To. And this is an interesting one because it is under a specific sort of subgenre under the horror genre. And I won't mention it specifically because I think it is perhaps a bit of a spoiler, but this is just a very kind of grounded, realistic take on this type and style of film that I really had a good time with. It just, something that is typically kind of a fantasy supernatural-ish is just handled in a very realistic and grounded way that I thought was just really interesting, and I really enjoyed that type of presentation. It's really about two siblings dealing with their younger brother who is very frail and sick for certain reasons, but had a good time with this. There's definitely a very sort of intense kind of dramatic sort of family drama aspect to this as well that just really adds a layer of tension in addition to kind of the horror type element that is in here. So it definitely holds some dramatic weight. It's dark and depressing. The lead performance from Owen Campbell, who we've seen in this year's X from Ty West, he's really solid. His performance is really good. I'm looking forward to seeing more out of that guy. He's definitely got some acting chops for sure. And so if you're looking for something more grounded, but that is still dark and disturbing, I would definitely recommend My Heart Can't Beat Unless You Tell It To. That comes in at number 11. Coming in at number 10 is Broadcast Signal Intrusion, and this one really sold me on just the idea and the concept alone. Anything that involves sort of cursed, forgotten, obscure, disturbing, lost media kind of thing really kind of hooks me in and grabs my interest. And this is the story of this guy. He's this video archivist who ends up finding these sort of cursed TV broadcasts that open up this dark web of murder and conspiracy and stuff like that. And so this one, again, just on the idea alone, really had me. And I think they pulled it off pretty well. There's a mystery element in this as well, as the lead protagonist is trying to solve a mystery and figure out what's going on behind these cursed broadcasts. If you like paranoia, conspiracy type horror stories with mystery in them, as I do, I really enjoyed Broadcast Signal Intrusion, and I would recommend it. So that takes us to number 9, and number 9 is VHS 94, and I actually did a review of the entire VHS series already on my channel, and then I did a ranking all 16 individual segments from all 4 movies. But if you want some more in-depth thoughts, I will put a link in the description to this review, but VHS 94 is actually my favorite out of the entire series. I think it's the most consistent overall. All 4 segments, I think, are at least pretty good to borderline great. Even if you're not a huge found footage fan, which I'm a bit of a sucker for found footage, but even if you're not a huge fan, this is, I think, definitely one of the better ones, and I would recommend it. There's just some good stuff in here. So that's number 9, VHS 94. That brings us to number 8, which is Come True. And this has a bit of a sci-fi vibe to it, as this story of this young girl who becomes a part of this sleep study and deals with her dreams and nightmares and things like that. There's a bit of a Nightmare on Elm Street vibe to it, as it's dealing with similar subjects. And I had a good time with this one. There's just some really memorable sequences where we actually see her nightmares, which just has some really dark and disturbing imagery. It's got some nice cinematography and just visually very pretty to look at. It just got some nice lighting in certain scenes, and the lead performance from the main girl is pretty solid as well. The only thing I will say is I think the last 10 seconds or so, really the last shot of the movie, should have been just entirely removed, as I think it tries to give an explanation for everything that we've seen, and I think it does that to the film's detriment. So it's like if they would have just cut out the last shot, it would have been a little bit better. But it doesn't by any means ruin the movie at all. I still had a good time with it. Just some really solid atmosphere and just disturbing imagery and stuff like that, with a nice sci-fi vibe to it. So I would still definitely recommend Come True. Coming in at number 7 is The Beta Test, and I have pretty quickly become a Jim Cummings fan. I also enjoyed his film from the previous year, The Wolf of Snow Hollow, but Jim Cummings just has a very interesting and unique approach. I like just his writing. This film definitely has some comedic elements to it that oftentimes gets me a little scared when you try to introduce comedy into horror, but it works pretty good here. This one is a bit maybe more of a thriller first than technically a horror, but nonetheless, still really solid. I like his character. I like his writing. This one's got just particularly an opening sequence with a kill in it that I found really disturbing and memorable. This one involves things like blackmail and infidelity. It just moves along at a pretty quick pace. Also, regarding some of the comedy, it's a bit of a satire take on modern Hollywood and things like that. And so overall, had a really solid time with it, and I'm looking forward to seeing what Jim Cummings brings us next. Next up at number 6 is Caveat, and this tells the story of this drifter who accepts this job to take care of this psychologically damaged woman in this abandoned house on this island. And this one is not going to be for everybody. I feel like just kind of the overall pacing, it's a bit slower and a bit of a slow burn, but I really had a good time with it. It's very psychological and mysterious. The set design especially really sticks out. It's just very kind of grungy and dirty, and the house that they're in, and it just really contributes to just the overall atmosphere. And there's just some pretty good stuff here. It's just got some good atmosphere. It's got a good mystery. And if you like a little bit more of a slow burn, kind of reserved type movie, it predominantly just takes place all in one setting. And so it's not this huge grand scope of a movie, but I had a good time with it, and I would recommend Caveat. So that is number 6. Number 5 is Censor. And this is a story that has a bit of real true elements into it, as it involves what are known as the video nasties and the British Censorship Board. And this is just basically about a handful of films that were censored in the 70s and 80s due to their content and explicit content and things like that. And so it kind of takes this real element of history and weaves in a story of a horror story and an overall mystery that I really enjoyed. Our lead character views one of these video nasties and thinks she recognizes somebody in the film as her sister who has disappeared, and so she goes about trying to solve that mystery. This one really works for me in a lot of the ways that Broadcast Signal Intrusion did, with just sort of that obscure, lost, disturbing media sort of thing. And anytime you can weave in a mystery into a horror film, I'm pretty much in. And this film does just that. It's got some good atmosphere, it's got a good mystery, it's got some nice visual presentation to it, and I really just found myself getting caught up into that story of mystery. Had a good time with Censor. I would recommend it. Next up at number 4 is The Night House, and the best part of The Night House for me was the performance from Rebecca Hall. I think she's absolutely fantastic in this, and to me, it was one of the best performances out of anything I saw out of all of last year. And so she is great in this, as she plays a recently widowed woman who is finding out that her husband had some secrets and he is not exactly who she thought he was. There's some good mystery to this as well, some nice twists and turns. It's a bit of a ghost story, a bit of a haunted house story as well, but with kind of a unique, different take on both of those. Also, too, just with her performance, this movie has some pretty kind of serious, dramatic, emotional weight to it as well that she just brings, and it just kind of has sort of that more realistic, darker element in terms of the drama and just dealing with loss and all that as well. So, really solid film from with a really solid lead performance, and so The Night House sits at number 4 for me. Coming in at number 3 is A Quiet Place Part 2, and I think this is the biggest budgeted movie that'll be on my list. But look, for mainstream horror, I think this is about as good as you can get. Really enjoyed the first one. I think Part 2 is pretty much on the same level as the first one as well. Emily Blunt here is really good. Cillian Murphy is really good as well. Just some really good suspense and tension here, as obviously just with them playing with the sound and having to be quiet really contributes to that overall tension and suspense. The opening sequence as well is pretty great, where John Krasinski comes back and you see the day that these creatures attack, and I think it's maybe one of the best horror sequences of last year. Just a great sequence, and had a lot of fun with A Quiet Place Part 2. All right, down to the final 2, and number 2 for me is Malignant from James Wan. And I know this was probably the most divisive horror film from last year. It was kind of an either love it or hate it type deal. I was curious. I checked out the Rotten Tomatoes rating, which last time I checked, the audience score was at 52%. So that pretty much tells you the horror community is divided on this one, and I come out on the positive side. And I understand the criticisms with it, and, you know, fair enough. Obviously, everybody can have their own opinion, but what I really like the most about this is that this is a film that is just so unique, and it has its own individual identity. And I think even if you don't like this movie, you gotta at least, we need to be sort of promoting and championing movies like this, because we want to see studios give directors creative control and creative freedom to just make the films that they want to make. And this is an example of that. Like, this is James Wan's vision, and love it or hate it, you at least get to see something that is different and unique and unlike anything you've seen, especially from the fact that this is like a mainstream big studio film is kind of amazing. And look, this movie, of course, is just ridiculous and crazy. But man, I'm glad that it went there. I'm glad it made the decisions that it made, as outrageous and over the top as they were. Man, I just had a fun time with it. That sequence where the twist is revealed and you figure out what exactly is happening, it's so ridiculous and outrageous, but man, I just had a smile on my face the whole time while watching it. And um, I appreciate the ambition. I want to see more movies like this. So that is my number two, Malignant. But coming in at number one for me is Saint Maud. And man, this is a pretty fantastic movie. I really, really like Saint Maud. The lead performance from, and I'm probably going to butcher her name, Morfydd Clark, is pretty great. And this is Rose Glass, the director. It's her directorial debut, and I cannot wait to see what she does next. Man, I thought Saint Maud is just great. And this is a horror film that is a character study, but also has elements of religious horror in it as well. And there's just some interesting themes regarding, how religion can be oppressive and abusive, and seeing her character, understanding of her faith take her to the places it does is just really disturbing. And man, the final shot of this movie is not something I will forget very soon. But Saint Maud sits at the top at number one for me. I pretty much loved everything about this, had just a great time with it, and I would highly recommend it if you haven't seen it yet. So that is my number one. Hey, thank you so much for watching. Please hit me up in the comments. I want to hear from you. Let me know what your favorite horror thriller movies from 2021 were. If you didn't see one of your favorites on the list, either maybe I didn't like it as much as you did, or I haven't seen it. I haven't seen everything, so I'm always looking for new recommendations. Would love to hear from you. Hit me up down in the comments. I would greatly appreciate it. Also, if you enjoy videos like this, that's what I do on The Haunted Beard. It is all horror and thriller movie content. Hit that red subscribe button for me. I would appreciate that as well. Thank you once again for tuning in. We will see you next time on The Haunted Beard.